Finally get started. Jade, would you like to open, or do we have any thoughts on that?
I think it's a good idea. She can read the land acknowledgement and
Okay, and then I'll introduce the panelists.
sounds good.
Okay,
Jade, do you have the text of the land acknowledgement?
I can look it up right now. It's on the school website, right?
It
Yep,
is,
I'll send it
yes.
right through the chat if you want. There you go.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
Jeremy, do you have the flyer handy?
Yeah, should I send that around to campus right now? A happening
I
now
think
email?
it's already been sent. But
Okay.
if you send it to me, because I don't have. Oh, that's a good idea. Let me check my email.
I'm going to send you the link, Mary. It's the easiest way to do it.
Okay.
This link is to the event page. So that it should have the flyer on it and the text of the flyer as well.
Okay.
That's the easiest thing to share, I think, right?
Okay. We may not have to do that at all if we can't get our panelists.
Yeah. Let's see if we can get this to work. Thank you for bearing with us, Thin, and getting us through this.
Have my students started coming in? Has anyone started coming in?
Yeah,
I saw that Cassandra's here, so I'm bringing her in.
Okay.
Yes, we got 130 in, and they're listening to us behind the scenes, getting
okay.
ready. So everybody's on board. Thanks to all of our attendees for your patience as we get some glitches out.
Did you send that to me, Jeremy?
Yes, in the chat.
Oh, in the chat. Okay. Okay. There's 53 in the chat right now.
Whoa, 60.
I'm having a hard time finding it, Jeremy. There's so many people in the chat.
Wow.
I don't know why they're in the chat necessarily.
How do we get credit for this?
Well, yeah, but we have their names. Thin always sends me a printout of not a printout, but a list of all of the attendees.
What's our first start back?
Jeremy,
It's our first start back, so we're going to have some hiccups.
yeah, we are.
Jeremy, what season is this?
This is spring?
No.
Or is that what you mean?
No. What? How many years? How many?
Oh.
Shows?
It's over a year. I know. I can't recall right now.
And they shouldn't be in the chat. They should be on their own.
I've muted the chat, so basically they have to use Q&A now.
There you go. Thank you. There you go. Professor made it. Good.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Hi. Can you see my PowerPoint?
I can.
Awesome.
How are you, Cassandra?
I'm doing wonderful, Mary. Nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you. Have you heard from Ray?
He is on.
Oh, he is. Oh, fantastic. Ray, speak up. Where are you?
He put something in the chat earlier. So.
Oh, he did?
Yes.
Okay.
He is here.
All right. Fantastic. You all just let us know when we can get started.
Whenever you are ready.
Jade is going to open us up.
I think Ray's trying to phone me. Hold on. Sorry.
Okay.
He should be able to get on. Basically, we're watching for him right now. And so if I see him, I'll promote him right away to panelists. So he should have gotten the panelist link that I sent. So I'm not sure why he's not on there yet. But I'll watch for him again. Please ask him to log on again. And I'll
Mary,
watch for Ray.
Ray says that he can see us. I think he needs to be invited as a panelist.
We sent him the link.
What is his name? What is his, is his screen name coming up as Ray Robertson or something else?
Is your name coming up as something else? Go to participants to see if your name comes up.
Yeah, I'm looking for anybody named Ray. I cannot find him.
I see him, Ray Vaughn Robertson, right up at the top.
Okay, great.
Finn, can you please promote him to
I
panelist?
will go ahead. I will go ahead and do that.
Thanks, everybody, for your patience. Thank you so much, Professors Cheney and Robertson, for joining us.
Yes, and you all need to know that we normally don't have these kinds of problems, but we are.
Okay, can you guys see Dr. Robertson?
Yes, I just promoted him. He's coming aboard right now.
You're coming on now. All right. Okay. Bye.
Right. Now, doesn't this make life exciting though? we have to look at the positive.
That's so true.
And if we didn't have someone as competent as Finn, I think we would just have to hang everything up.
But there's Dr.
Finn
Robertson.
Why is this showing my face? I got a bit. Hey, I have a camera on my computer. I don't know why it's not showing my face.
Do you have
Oh, here it is. Here it is. Now it says the host asked you to start your video. Okay. Okay.
How are you?
I didn't realize it was so dim. I'm okay. I was trying to wear orange for FAMU. That's what I was trying to do. So that's why.
Very nice.
Bright orange.
Very nice. Wearing your school colors. I wish I had thought of that. We have a student, Jade, who is going to lead us in, Jade McDonald. And then I will, she's going to do land acknowledgement, and then I will, I'll introduce our guests. So Jade, if you want to get started.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I hope you're all it's afternoon. Good afternoon. Hope everyone's doing well. So for our land acknowledgement today, we would like to recognize that California State University of San Bernardino sits on the territory and ancestral land of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. We recognize that every member of the California State University San Bernardino community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1965. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold California State University San Bernardino more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples.
Indeed. Thank you, Jade. Thank you. We have, as usual, a really exciting program for you today. For those of you, we've been gone for a while. We've been gone for a few weeks because of the holidays and spring break. So we want, though, to just kind of historically let you know that we began this program after the murder of George Floyd and so many others at the hands of police, and a few of us got together, and this was actually a suggestion of one of our graduate students that we should maybe try to do a program on the relationship between people of color and the police. And we have, if you'll see our program, which is on our website, we have really extended that to the courts, to prisons, and so many aspects of the criminal justice system. So with that in mind, We think we have a pretty exciting program for you today. We have two outstanding academics. Dr. Ray Von Robertson is a professor of sociology at Florida A&M University, and he is wearing his pride color today, orange, and we welcome him, as well as Dr. Cassandra Cheney from Louisiana State University. Yay, my home state. And she is in the School of Social Work. So without any further delay, we want to open up to our guests today, welcome them, and look forward to their presentation.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Mary. And I want to thank everyone that took time from their day to attend. My colleagues, past and present, my friends, my family, as well as undergraduates or graduate students who might also be in attendance. I want to especially thank the organizers of this event and for inviting Dr. Robertson and I to participate in this very much needed discussion. Stan Fulch with the West Side Action Group, Robbie Madrigal, Jeremy Murray, and Mary Texera. Thank you again for inviting us, and we look forward to the discussion.
Oh, I didn't know if I could say something too. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I just want to say thank you as well, because I didn't know if I should talk, because I said I know Cassandra's or Dr. Cheney's about to get into everything. So I just want to say thank you guys for inviting me as well. So you can go ahead, Dr. Cheney. Sorry.
And I just need to impress on both of you that we do not stand on formality here. So you just jump in.
Oh, okay, okay.
Anytime you feel like it. Stan has always proven to be an excellent co-host, and he has a reputation for jumping right in there too, as well as I. So. Let's just have fun today. And obviously a very sober subject, but I've always felt that there's humor in everything. So with that, please continue, Dr. Cheney.
Okay, thank you. So this is the book that will actually be featured, that will actually center our discussion on today. So we're going to really start out by providing an overview. So we're going to start by discussing I would start by discussing scholarship related to law enforcement and Black communities. This book, that's the feature of our discussion, was published in 2019, but there were other works that we actually published before the publication of this book, as well as scholarship that actually came after the publication of this book. The significance of the current study, I will also discuss that. Dr. Robertson would then look at the legacy of maltreatment among Black people in America. He will also discuss early antecedents of police brutality against African Americans. I will discuss the methodology and the results of this work. Dr. Robertson is going to put these findings into a broader context in the discussion. I will discuss the need for police reform, in particular, my work with former LSU President Tom Galligan. I was appointed to serve on the Police Training and De-Escalation Task Force, which is very much tied to our focus on the need for police reform. We're going to discuss next steps, and then we're going to end with Q&A. So when looking at the scholarship related to law enforcement, as you can see, the first one mentioned is Racism and Police Brutality in America. That was actually published in 2013. I would say out of all of our empirical manuscripts, this one has been literally cited thousands of times by academics in the United States and even abroad. We've also we wrote, Can We All Get Along? Black's Historical and Contemporary Injustice with Law Enforcement through the the journal, the Western Journal of Black Studies. I published a work in a book entitled The Assault on Communities of Color, Exploring the Realities of Race-Based Violence. The title of that book chapter was Michael Brown and the Shared Ambivalence of Black and Brown America. Dr. Robertson and I, that in that same year, published the article Armed and Dangerous, an examination of fatal shootings of unarmed Black people by police. And that in that work, we actually did a content analysis of all of the African Americans that had actually been murdered, right? And overwhelmingly, the majority of them were unarmed at the time of their deaths. But then we see that while the majority of them were African American males, not all of them were. In fact, many of them were women, and several of them were even children. Bartholomew et al., we actually published the article entitled Law Enforcement Perceptions of Their Relationship with Community, Law Enforcement Surveys and Community Focus Groups in the Journal of Human Behavior and the Social Environment. That like 2 years later, I published the book chapter, Look How Strong He Is, Social Media Messages and the Communal Mothering of Cody Gaines. And then our most recent work was The Most Innocent Victim of a Police Shooting, Media Framing of Justine Damon. Many of you probably know she was actually the Caucasian woman who was actually white and Australian. Remember, she actually flagged down a police officer in Minneapolis, and actually she got shot actually trying to get help for someone else. So we really look at from a very critical perspective, the ways in which the media frames the death of a white woman, right, against the death of Black people. So these are many of our featured works. So let's also look at some of this in terms of the significance of this study. When we actually think about it, we know the circumstances surrounding many of their deaths. We know their stories, but in many cases, we know their names as well, right? So we have the names of various individuals, African Americans who have actually lost their lives due to police violence. George Floyd, Oscar Grant, Tamir Rice, who was only 12 years old and was actually holding a toy gun when he was murdered. Breonna Taylor, right? Sandra Bland, Sean Bell, Alton Sterling, right? So these are not just individuals that lost their lives to police. These individuals had names, they had personalities, they had families, they had communities from which they have actually come from. So in terms of why is this topic important? Well, when we look at from a racial perspective, African Americans make up only 13% of the United States population, yet they are 5 times more likely than whites, who make up approximately 70% of the population, to be murdered by police. So this means that there is a disproportionate level, right, or number of African Americans that are losing their lives to police violence. Even though Blacks are 1.3 times less likely to be armed than whites, they are 3 times more likely to be murdered by police. So oftentimes when individuals say, well, police had to shoot a Black person because they were armed, right? Foon's research finds that this is absolutely not true, right? That African Americans are least likely to be armed, yet they are disproportionately more likely to be murdered by police. Santimon's work found that although whites comprise the largest portion of the population, when we look out of every 100,000 deaths, we see again that disproportionality, where Black men and boys are murdered at a rate of 96 out of 100,000, Compare that with white men, who is only 39 out of 100,000. When we look at the murder rate in general, for the general population, it's 52 out of 100,000. So we see that, again, 96 African Americans are murdered out of that number. The second reason why this is important is because the deaths, there have been more deaths over time, right? So we would even when we look at from the time that George Floyd was actually lost his life in the streets of Minneapolis, when Derek Chauvin actually stood on his neck for 9 minutes, we see that there have actually been an increase in the number of African Americans that have lost their lives. Another thing to consider is that the number of days that police engage in violence far outweigh the number of non-violent days, right? So what this really means is that the majority of the cases in which police engage in violent acts do not register in terms of the media radar, right? This means that the majority of cases the public does not know about, right? During 2019, there were only 27 days when police did not murder someone in the United States, and with Black people, again, disproportionately, making up 3 times as many of the 1,098 victims than the murder of white people during that same year. When we look at this, even from a global perspective, in the UK, police violence has definitely increased in United Kingdom. Even related to this, Black people in the US and Britain greatly do not trust police. In fact, according to a nationally representative survey, the majority of Black and white Americans believe Black people are treated less fairly than whites when dealing with the criminal justice system as a whole. Black people in the United Kingdom, specifically 2/3 of young Black British people do not trust the police to act fairly toward them. And according to a recent CNN poll, almost half of Black Britons, compared to 26% of white respondents, do not believe the police have treated them with respect. Relatedly, this poll also found 54% of Black Britons believe the police are institutionally racist, compared with 27% of whites. So we see, when we look at this from a broad perspective, whether in the United States or whether in the UK, Blacks across the board have they're disproportionately more likely to be victims of excessive force, murdered by the police, but we also correlated with that is a very low level of trust in the police as an institution. Finally, as I just mentioned, as it relates to Great Britain. So Dr. Robertson is going to discuss a legacy of mistreatment among Black people in America.
Okay, so first off, Dr. Cheney, since I'm not controlling the slide, I'll just say go to the next slide when I'm finished, because you probably wouldn't have any way of knowing when I'm finished. But okay, now the book, we begin the book by talking about Black people in America, a legacy of maltreatment, and we felt it was important to, because I think in American society there is a general understanding that particularly as it relates to this book, African Americans are treated unfairly by the police or law enforcement. So we wanted to begin with sort of taking a historical look at the history of marginalization of African Americans. Now, we began particularly with the first, police officers, which were plantation overseers. Now, of course, we can say, we know that Black people or people of African descent were treated unfairly long before that. But as it relates to the police or law enforcement, we begin with the first, I guess you could say, at least types of individuals who were considered police officers, plantation overseers in South Carolina in 1704. And then we, go through enslavement, the lynching period, racial riots. And it was one thing important here that we, and then also another significant point was the film Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith in 1915. That particular movie was critical when it comes to a legacy of maltreatment of African Americans because it depicted Black males, particularly as drunkards, lazy, and also susceptible to potentially raping white women. And therefore, America could only be saved if the Ku Klux Klan came in and, took care of things. And it was at least historically from what I've read, it was quite a Klan recruitment tool. And I know we have a historian on the panel, right? And I don't know if I can't remember the name from the emails, his name, but it has been said that there was a private viewing for then President Woodrow Wilson in the White House, and he reportedly asserted that it was like history written with lightning, talking about the movie Birth of a Nation because it was so true. But and then also all of what I've been talking about thus far is rooted in the concept of white supremacy. And I'm not going to read the entire definition there, but basically it is a system that exploits and oppresses individuals, continents, nations, and peoples who are classified as non-white, and provides advantages for those who are classified as white. Okay, so you can go ahead and switch the slide, Dr. Cheney. Because I'm kind of long-winded and I didn't want to talk too much. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I guess I didn't even realize that that I already talked about D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. But as I said before, it was critical in terms of when I guess you could say crystallizing, and legitimizing the maltreatment of African Americans. And I think it was probably one of the first depictions, if not probably first depictions of African Americans in film in that manner as well. And and of course I said it was a Klan recruitment tool. And even though I'm not certain if President Wilson had a private screening in the White House, as some have suggested, I do know that he reportedly described it as history written in lightning because it was true, at least in his eyes, the stereotypes that were, I guess you could say, promoted in the film. Okay, Dr. Cheney, you can switch the slides now. Okay, and another thing we talk about in this first chapter is the trope that is common to Black males as that big brute. In terms of that, we're always potentially, at least stereotypically, potentially could cause harm to other people. And that is something that historically and even contemporaneously makes it difficult for African American men to navigate the social terrain of America, because you're always a suspect. Or as we mentioned in the book, later in the book, not in the first chapter, but research by Brunson and Miller and published in 2006, police have referred to African Americans as symbolic assailants. And that just basically means if we haven't committed a crime at that particular point where the police encounter us, that we're probably going to commit one. So it's almost like giving a green light to go ahead and harass us or whatever you're going to do to us. Because like I said, if you haven't committed a crime, you're probably going to. Okay, you go ahead, Dr. Cheney. And lastly, and I know Dr. Cheney mentioned Tamir Rice, but and I hadn't mentioned this before, but the case of Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin, even though Trayvon Martin wasn't killed by a police officer, it was just a guy who I guess had aspirations of being a police officer, but Tamir Rice was. And these two incidents, as tragic as they were an integral part of us even coming up with the idea to look into this. And personally with myself, it was the fact that there was scholarship on police, I guess you say use of excessive force, because that's what tends to be used more in the literature, excessive force instead of brutality. But there just wasn't enough of it. And particularly, it didn't address how big of a problem it was. But these two incidents were two of those that were integral in just saying, hey, let's put this book together. Okay, I'm finished with that, Dr. Cheney. Okay. And so here we're talking about some early antecedents of police brutality against African Americans. So when you're speaking of early antecedents, you're talking of some of the predecessors, historical predecessors to contemporary brutality against African Americans. So we'd have to go back to those plantation overseers, because those were the first quote unquote, I guess you could say unofficial police officers, because there was no police department, but they served the purpose of police officers because they patrolled, African American slaves and were able to, administer punishments with impunity. And unfortunately, in many cases, that's what seems to go on today. But more importantly, as it says on the slide, related to slave patrols, they first serve the purpose of maintaining the status of the enslaved African as a piece of property. They also maintained white supremacy, and finally, they prevented any possibility of insurrection on the part of the slaves, because and something that was commonplace when punishments were administered during the slave patrol era, often other slaves were made to watch, to sort of serve as a warning. So if you get out of line, this too can happen to you, or this too could be you. Okay, that's it. Not Cheney. Okay. Oh, and this was something I was wanting to mention earlier. I just could not remember this reference. But yeah, in February 2015, the Equal Justice Initiative, founded by civil rights attorney Brian Stevenson, he's also the organization's executive director. Basically, he created a lynching museum, which exists today in Montgomery, Alabama, which fortunately is only 250 miles from where I am in Tallahassee, and I plan to visit it this year. I've been saying that for, since its founding. But more importantly, he has in the museum itself, he has jars with soil that was taken from the actual, I guess you could say, places where these lynchings occurred, from every one of these lynchings, these 3,959 documented lynchings from 1877 through 1950. And it also deserves to be mentioned is that we never really know how many lynchings there are, because those are the ones that were documented. And if you do some historical research, you know that people could actually be killed trying to document lynchings. So most of them were undocumented. So therefore, there's no telling, but it definitely, there's no telling how many lynchings occurred, but they definitely deserve to be mentioned in any discussion of early antecedents of police brutality, because a lynching is basically a public murder, as the late sociologist James Lowen described them in one of his classic books. I can't remember the title of the book, but it's one of his classic ones that he wrote. Sundown Towns. That was the title of the book. I'm sorry, Sundown Towns. Yes, in this classic book, Sundown Towns. So yeah, that's it with that particular slide, Dr. Cheney.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Dr. Robertson. As you were talking, I thought about the very famous Billie Holiday song, Strange Fruit, right? That's actually talking about the horrors of lynching and how she actually became a target by the government for her insistence on singing that song. I just love Billie Holiday. She's such a revolutionary, right? Especially during that time, to say, no, I will not be silent in terms of what is really going on in the Black community. We're gonna transition now and kind of really talk about the methodology that was used in this study. So there were actually a total of 30 participants, slightly more females, 18 females, 12 males. In terms of the race, overwhelmingly African American. One person identified as Black and Hispanic. One participant did not disclose their race. The age range was from ages 19 to 29 with an average age of 22.93 years. Education was a little bit slightly over high school, education, 13.5 years. The average income was 40,000. In terms of location, almost half of them were from Florida. 14% did not disclose their location. One person was from California and one person was from Maryland. In terms of their classifications, we see that 15 were juniors, 3 were seniors, 2 were sophomores, 4 were graduate students, 1 was a freshman, and 1 person did not disclose their classification. We see about a third were actually criminal justice majors. 11% were sociology majors. The same number were psychology majors. 3 were public administration majors. 2 were health science majors. 1 was a pre-physical therapy major. 1 was an English major. 1 was interdisciplinary studies. 1 was a physical therapy major, and 1 was a political science major. So in terms of the procedure for this study, we use a purposeful sampling procedure. Specifically, we were interested in African-American college students. So later during this discussion, we're going to talk about our next steps. But for this book, the focus was on the perceptions of college students because we saw a clear void in the research, right, in terms of looking at that demographic. In terms of the selection criteria, any individual that actually self-identified as African-American or Black, and as well as being a current undergraduate or graduate student. The interviews were audio recorded. They lasted approximately 60 minutes, and they were later transcribed. So essentially, the study had 2 parts. So we have the quantitative part that actually focused on the survey results, and then the qualitative reports, which is a portion which is actually the word data. To the left of your screen, you'll actually see the 4 quantitative questions, right? Or questions related to numbers. The first being on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being lowest and 10 being highest. How much do you trust the police? The second is, do you believe the police treat Black people better than, equal to, or worse than white people? The third question was, has a police officer ever used an excessive amount of force on you? And then the last question was, has a police officer ever used an excessive amount of force on someone that you know? So we actually conducted, as is typical with quantitative research, we provided frequencies or the specific number of participants that provided responses to each of these. And then we also separated based on their gender as well as their classification. So the qualitative questions, there were actually 8 of them. The first being, when you hear the word police, what words immediately come to mind? The second, in general, how do you view the police? Third, when you hear of incidents of police brutality, does it influence how you feel about the police? If not, why not? If so, how so? Next, when you become aware of an incident where a police officer used excessive force and he or she said, I feared for my life, what do you think? Next, when you become aware of an incident where a police officer used excessive force and he or she said, I fear for my life, how do you feel, or what do you feel? 10th, what steps, if any, do you believe law enforcement agencies should take to deal with issues related to police brutality? What steps, if any, do you think universities and colleges should take to deal with issues related to police brutality? And then lastly, is there anything else that you would like to share? So let's look at the results. So first, starting off with the quantitative or the survey questions. So remember, again, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being lowest and 10 being highest, how much do you trust the police? We see that overwhelmingly, there was a very low level of trust in police. I actually, in that second I'm not gonna like read like each of them in terms of the numbers, but if you look at the 6th line down, it actually says that the average ranking was 1.26. So remember, like 1 was the absolute lowest. So we see that among these 30 participants, they had a very low level of trust in police. The second question, if you look at the top, do you believe the police treat Black people better than, equal to, or worse than white people? On this question, as you can see, the 4th line from the bottom in the 2nd paragraph, all participants, so we had every single person, 100% believe that police treat Black people worse than they treat white people. But then the next question, has a police officer ever used an excessive amount of force on someone that you know, or you or someone that you know? So we see in terms of this question, the majority were not themselves victims of excessive force or police brutality, 23%. But the overwhelming majority of them knew someone, that personally was a victim of police violence. In fact, the majority of them never experienced it personally. That's actually 77%. But then 23% knew of someone. In most cases, this was a friend or family member. So this was not just something that they actually saw on the news media. This was actually someone that was very close to them. So in terms of the qualitative findings, these were, as I mentioned before, were all of the questions that we asked that were the word data questions. I deliberately highlighted in red the ones that I'm going to focus on, we're going to focus on for this particular presentation. So,
I think it's in the.
I think someone needs to mute yourself.
I'm not sure. I didn't order it.
Somebody said it was 005.
Then
Ben, can you mute yourself? Oh, Ben. Okay, as I said, we don't stand on formality, so let's just keep going.
Okay, so as I mentioned, in the previous slide, I mentioned all the qualitative questions that we asked, but for this, I deliberately bolded, right, in red, the ones that are going to be the focus of this discussion. So number 4, when you hear of incidents of police brutality, does it influence how you feel about the police? If not, why not? If so, how so? Question 10, what steps, if any, do you believe law enforcement agencies should take to deal with issues related to police brutality? And then the final question we're going to focus on today, what steps, if any, do you believe universities and colleges should take to deal with issues related to police brutality? So, not why not. So one of the things I want to mention related before I even get into this is all of the names that I'm going to mention during this presentations are pseudonyms or fake names. These are not. This was actually done to protect the identity of the participants. But we see that only 2 females said that they actually don't necessarily have a negative perception of police. In fact, Anita, she specifically says, I know what the police are here to do. It is just the people in the uniform that I do not trust. So this person seems that they had actually no problem separating oftentimes what is referred kind of in the lay community as the bad actors or the bad apples, right? So she doesn't automatically assume that all police are that way based on the actions of a few. We see another participant, Asia. She mentions, I know what the police are here to do. It is just the folks in uniform I do not trust. And then both of their responses obviously mirror one another in terms of how they feel. But overwhelmingly, in fact, the 90% of the total number of participants said it most definitely affects how they feel about the police. And in fact, it actually increases their likelihood of having a very negative view of police. So we have an example here of Jewel, who's 21, who's a criminal justice major. And she says, the more I hear about these types of incidents, I feel like it is becoming the norm and people are getting complacent. I would say I'm just tired of hearing about this type of violence. Then we have another, essentially another theme that came up a lot was kind of, when another incident of police brutality or murder would happen, several participants would say, okay, almost like, here we go again, right? Paul, a 36-year-old Black male, he actually made the comment, yes, because it reinforces what I already think about police, stuff that I see and that I do not see. Karen, who was a 23-year-old Black female, who was a physical therapy major, says, yes, it does, because it is just hard to hear stories about them killing individuals because they're Black. You do not trust them. They seem to operate on a shoot first, ask questions later mindset. In addition to this, Rachel, who's 28 years old, says most definitely, because when you think of the police, you think of people who are supposed to protect and serve. I feel that there have been more profiling than protecting that has been taking place lately. Another that I thought was a very poignant statement made by one African-American male, Brendan, who's 24 years old, and he's a criminal justice major. He says, yes, because I look at the situation and I think that could have been me. So African Americans are not, when they see incidences of police violence, they are not separating themselves from what they see, right? You see someone who is the same race as you, oftentimes someone that is the same age as yourself, who is from the same community as yourself, right? Who oftentimes dresses the way that you do, that engages in the same social interactions as you do, actually losing their life to police. It's hard to not realize that the same could actually happen to you as well. Then this is actually the next question here. So what steps, if any, do you believe that law enforcement agencies should take to deal with issues related to police brutality? We see here that the 4 main themes were stricter hiring and training practices, to reevaluate current laws and policies, to require body cameras, and then some had a very bleak outlook, says, it does not matter, right? Racism is so entrenched within people's psyches, within the fabric of America, nothing will actually change. We see I actually read some of the examples related to this. One person said, Malcolm, who's 23 years old, a criminal justice major, says they need to develop better communication skills and properly train officers to use force. Denise, a 20-year-old English major, says, I feel that they should go through in-depth background screenings in terms of the way that they are trained. Leah, a 21-year-old Black female who is a pre-occupational therapy major, says, I think more thorough training should be given, some kind of audit. Look at their records or files and any citations for brutality or doing something awful. Then they should be fired. The hiring process should be standardized. They should have more thorough background checks. I also think they should have rigorous sensitivity training. So these are actually some of the examples of this particular theme. Related to nothing will change, we see one person here, Michelle, who's 21 years old, who's a public administration major. She says, I do not feel that they can really do anything. I feel that each individual has their own thoughts and that individual is going to do what they think is right. So we see a very bleak view among several of the participants, and because of time, I cannot read all of them, but these were a few. And here's the last question. What steps, if any, do you believe universities and colleges should take to deal with issues related to police brutality? The 4 themes that were mentioned here are university-led education when interacting with law enforcement, university-led law enforcement community efforts, university advocating attitudinal and policy changes in law enforcement, and then lastly, university accountability of law enforcement. So related to university-led education, related to this theme, several 14 participants and 47% of the total number use words or phrases that relate to participants' belief that universities and colleges should initiate a lot of the efforts surrounding police brutality through such things as seminars, workshops, and courses that advise students of their legal rights, as well as how to interact with members of law enforcement. Related to this, Carrie made the comment. She says, I guess classes like sociology or law, in which students can learn more about their rights and which laws are what. Elijah, 19-year-old political science major, says they should make students aware of their rights and let them know what they have and have not to do when they are pulled over by police. Aaliyah says, I feel like the college should educate the people interested in changing the system in a way that is inclusive and recognizes the faults in the system of law enforcement, attempt to not perpetuate the same tropes about people of color that exist in law enforcement. In terms of university-led efforts, since service is actually one of the core missions of land-grant institutions, 5 individuals, or 17% of the total number, said that essentially universities should actually embrace the charge of reducing a lot of the acrimonious relationship that exists between minority communities and members of law enforcement. Paul said they should have police officers come to the university and give courses so that students will know about them and their purpose in the community. So we see like a very, these advocating for a stronger collaborations between universities and members of law enforcement. Brendan says, I think that the university should reach out to the local police departments in their cities so that officers could come and talk to the students and hold seminars so that they and the students can build a positive relationship. In terms of the universities advocating for attitudinal and policy changes, 5 individuals mentioned that universities should ensure that members of law enforcement change how they perceive African Americans and that they abide by laws and policies that protects all citizens. So they are essentially putting the onus on law enforcement agencies. Michaela, a 23-year-old Black female, she says, I feel the first step any law enforcement officer should take is to not view any African American male as the same. In other words, they should not stereotype them. They should treat them with respect. And then in terms of the last theme here, university accountability of law enforcement, 4 participants, or 13%, mentioned that universities and colleges should be at the forefront of making law enforcement accountable for police brutality. Some of the things that they mentioned is that primarily white institutions need to break psychological chains of having white people scared, or the trope, as Dr. Robertson mentions, of being big, Black, and being dangerous, right? Oftentimes these feelings operate on a very unconscious level, right? But they can have very negative consequences for African Americans. Many students even talked about being advocates. So Rachel said, HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, especially should be at the forefront of leading the movement to have police officers be held accountable. They can do it. Well, I mean, protesting does not help. I do not feel any real change, changing of laws come out of protesting. Sometimes a lot of community damage comes from protesting, and that is not conducive to the movement that that will actually bring about change. Whereas other students definitely believe that um, uh, protesting is very important and very necessary. So while Rachel did not have a lot of faith in protesting, we see that other students actually do. In fact, related to this, Lisa, she actually makes the comments that protesting is very, very necessary. That's the only way that things actually change in the past, and it's the only way that current change will come about. So I'm going to turn over to Dr. Robertson to put these findings in a broader context.
Okay, and I'll try to not be as long-winded as I was before. But so the first area that I want to discuss briefly in the discussion section is the efficacy of better training. Now, not surprisingly, when people here, particularly African Americans here, okay, maybe the situation when it comes to the relationships between African Americans and police officers or law enforcement officers can be improved through training, we tend to meet it with some skepticism. And, there are several reasons for this. One reason is that, we often, because we're in an age where social media is prominent. I know personally, I've seen several different viral videos of police um, having interactions with white suspects, and the white suspect may actually fight the police officer. I know one video I saw, this one white person fought two police officers and took their vehicle, and they didn't shoot at him. They just watched the person drive off with their vehicle. And I'm thinking, and so that skepticism comes because is the training really the answer? Because it seems like when it comes to certain groups of people, they kind of know what to do, and they know how to de-escalate and all of those things that are brought up when we hear talk of the efficacy of better training. But now there is one study that we talk about in the book by Owens and others. Is a 2018 publication, I'm sorry, titled "Can You Build a Better Cop?" Now, in this particular publication, the authors talk about that procedural justice training shows some prominence. Now, I mean, some promise, I'm sorry. Now, it's not a panacea by any stretch of the imagination, but procedural justice training um, refers to trainings that are designed to slow down the officer's thought processes when they're interacting with someone. And that's particularly with someone to, pretty much promote de-escalation so that, it won't, I guess you could say, morph into a possible situation where there could be the use of excessive force and things like that. So procedural justice training has shown some prominence because it can lead to officers possibly de-escalating a situation because they're trying to connect with the individual that they're interacting with. Now, there were two ancillary concerns associated with this study. The first is when police have excessive numbers of discretionary arrests, that can lead to more possibilities for the use of excessive force. So this was kind of in support of the use of procedural justice training. Then another ancillary concern is that there is little scholarly research in the area of how do you close the gulf when it comes to African Americans and their trust in police. Now, of course, there's been a lot, talk about it, maybe, social media talk shows, lay persons having conversations, but when it, comes to actual scholarship. Now, additionally, I want to mention another study, and so I'm still under this efficacy of better training. It's a study by Houghton, excuse me, no, Stoughton, I'm sorry, I pronounced the name wrong, published in 2015. And this particular study talks about the training in terms of police tend to receive military style training in the academy. And so what happens is that often officers will take on the persona of almost soldiers in a sense, in that, they're going off to battle when they're going on their beat. Now, of course, that type of mindset doesn't bode well when the individuals you're supposed to be protecting and serving, you're looking at them as an enemy force. So that's problematic in itself. But there were 3 specific ways that procedural justice training can, show some promises I mentioned earlier that the article mentioned. First, it can encourage when procedural justice training is implemented and officers are held accountable, this can serve to improve the public perception of police, right? And encourage respect for law enforcement. And, that would go a long way because, at least in the African-American community, I think most African-Americans can agree that, they're, at least police don't receive the respect from, in terms of, the profession as it should, because of the problematic interactions. And so another advantage or a positive associated with procedural justice training is that it can also alter officer behavior. I mean, now this, you could say to a certain extent, may be wishful thinking, but if you're implementing the procedural justice training that is centered on slowing down the officer's thoughts when they encounter an individual to improve their interactions, you can assume that it could possibly change their behavior. And now the third positive that's associated, I'm still talking about the efficacy of better training here, procedural justice training can promote the internal reorganization of police forces. And hopefully this could result in a decreasing of the impact of the blue wall of silence. And, I would think most of us at least have heard of that phrase, the blue wall of silence. And it's basically means that officers, stick together. They don't tell on themselves. They don't, as young people say, snitch on themselves. And that can present a problem when it comes to in improving police community relations. Now, there's a couple more studies I want to mention before I get to community policing and its prospects for change. Now, a study by Bronson and Miller, and I mentioned this study earlier, 2006 publication, because when I mentioned it earlier, I talked about how in that particular study, it mentioned that police officers view African-American males as symbolic assailants. Now, these 3 contributions that I want to mention in this efficacy of better training section, the first is that the article pointed out that not surprisingly, the negative perceptions of African-American men can lead to officers being less responsive to crime in Black communities. Okay, we have 15 minutes for questions and wrap up. I'm sorry, I guess I need to hurry up. I saw that little message at the bottom there. Okay, I'll try to speed this up. Okay, and then the second important finding is that African-American males are always viewed as criminals. It's basically the concept of symbolic assailants. And then third was the concept of minority threat. And basically minority threat suggests that as the percentage, or no, not the percentage, the proportion, the perception of the proportion of people of color in a neighborhood increases, whites' fears of crime tend to increase as well. But in particular, when it comes to African-American males, when the perception of an increase in the proportion of African-Americans in a particular community is present, that fear of crime by whites increases more than it does with any other group. Okay, so let me go to community policing and its prospects for positive change. Now, community policing has been in existence since the 1960s. You know, it was the result of a confluence of factors. You're thinking of urban unrest, civil rights movement, a Black Power movement of the 1960s. Okay, and so, but the reason why it has not had as much success as intended is that there is no universal standard definition of what constitutes community policing in law enforcement. And so that can present some problems. Now, some steps that can be taken to end poor community police relations. First, and I've mentioned this earlier, is that police should get away from the military style training and go more towards guardian style training, which is designed to help, help protect and serve. I'm sorry about to say help and serve, but protect and serve. And then second, training them police officers to overcome bias or their biases. And this is often, well, the attempt to accomplish this is often through implicit bias training. But studies have also shown that just making an officer aware of their biases does not always prevent them from acting on those biases. Okay, so basically implicit bias is basically when you mention, when a name of a group is mentioned, like African Americans, whites, what type of thoughts come to mind when you hear, the group, and what are the characteristics you attribute to the group? So it's thought that if the individuals who hold implicit biases, because remember, implicit biases are supposed to be held unconsciously, that if you make them aware of them, they will not act on them. But there is no proof that shows you it'll make them not act on them. They might just be aware that they're acting on their biases, but they're still acting on them. And then lastly, to replace hopelessness in communities with hope and justice. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, and this is, and we talk about this particular program specifically in the book, but it talks about the East Los Angeles Community Safety Partnership Unit of the LAPD. Now, I guess I could ask you guys if you heard of that, because that particular unit, but at least from what I read, it operates in one of the more, I guess you could say, well-known housing projects in East LA. And it has shown some promise because it has encouraged officers to like patrol, the floors of the building. And actually, it has also encouraged the officers to engage the community, particularly like if there are elderly members in the housing unit who can't afford glasses, they'll purchase glasses. They've set up police athletic leagues for some of the children. So that has helped to improve relations in that particular setting. Now, if we can only get stuff like that done on a wider scale. And then lastly, when it comes to body worn cameras and dashboard cameras, well, those can show promise in the sense that if you can hold officers accountable for when because there have been several instances just across the US of, a crime occurs and then the officer's camera wasn't on, so if you could set up a system in which they're held accountable when their camera doesn't come on during an interaction with an assailant or a potential assailant, or situations when their dashboard cameras just magically turn off, if there can be some accountability implemented so that officers can be disciplined when that happens. But I'm gonna give you 5 quick, and it's gonna be really quick because I saw that announcement about the time, is that 5 positives associated with dashboard cameras. First, they can increase officer safety, right? Because it's evidence of what happened. Secondly, it could possibly reduce liability because you have what went on video. And so hopefully that's a possible positive. It can reduce liability. Third, it can promote police transparency. Fourth, and this is an ancillary positive, it could possibly improve conviction rates. And then it could result in improved training because some of these videos can be used in officer training. We're getting away from the military training, hopefully, and this guardian training, and they can show examples of how not to handle a particular situation. So I'm finished. I know I probably went over time a little bit, but hopefully I left a few minutes for some questions.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. Here are our references. The need for police reform, I'm going to do this really, really quickly. When we talk about police reform, it's essentially making police bodies more people-centered. So realizing that these are individuals that come from families and communities. The second to the last, I really want to pay attention to. I mean, this is being recorded, so anyone that's seeing could actually come back. But that second to the last one upholds high levels of accountability in its conduct. So when we see instances of police brutality, this is actually what we are not overwhelmingly seeing is any accountability for these murders. This is actually this something that I would encourage everyone to view. It's actually 7 minutes, a little bit over 7.5 minutes. Is police reform even possible? In fact, many of the recommendations that we make in terms of minimizing police excessive force, police brutality, are mentioned in this slide here. At the onset, I mentioned that I actually served on the police training, screening, and de-escalation task force. This was actually, I was appointed to this position through former LSU President Thomas Galligan. And I was actually on the Community Relations and Internal Operations Subcommittee. On that committee was the Superintendent of Louisiana State Police, Colonel Lamar Davis, Dr. Michael McClanahan, who is actually one of the board members of the NAACP, Representative Ted James, and then Reverend Fred Smith. Here were some of the things, our responsibilities on that committee. And I will not mention everything on here, but I think some of the things that are very important to note are some of the recommendations that were put forth from that task force is to require that sustained complaints regarding officers remain in that officer's file for at least 10 years. Before this, it was only 5 years. So as a task force, we said, no, there has to be a pattern, right? Because there's no way to establish a pattern, right, if it doesn't remain in the officer's file for a short period of time. So we recommended that be extended, but then also prohibiting the use of chokeholds and carotid holds. We see this is actually these are illegal, but they're still being used, and unfortunately among many officers. Prohibit the use of no-knock warrants. We see Breonna Taylor lost her life because of police using a no-knock warrant. Other things related to this, in terms of our next steps. Well, currently I am the primary investigator for a grant that I received through NAD, the National Association of Deans and Directors. The name of that grant is Nothing Can Change Until It Is Faced: Community Sentiment of Police and Low-Income Disenfranchised Communities. So this is an ongoing study. I'm still doing it now. In fact, I did some interviews last week, the week before, 3 days ago, and asking members of the community in terms of their perceptions. Of course, I'm casting a wider net than what we did for this study. So it's not just college students, it's individuals in the community, even if they only receive, if they did not receive a high school education. And then our next step is to examine the perspectives of Black police officers. There is nothing written on this. And during my conversations with Colonel Davis, I realized that police actually, they deal with a lot, right? But Black police officers are a minority within the law enforcement agencies, right? So we know a lot of the issues that Black folks who are civilians are dealing with, right? Police officers can oftentimes be dealing with a lot of those same issues. There's a high level of depression, even suicide among officers, right? So Dr. Robertson and I actually want to get a very broad perspective, right, of community perceptions of police, but then as well as African-American police officers as well. This is an excellent, excellent thing I would recommend. And I hope, do we have time where I can show this? Is there time?
Actually, probably not. If our audience can just take take the title, because we have people who are on their lunch breaks and who
Oh,
have to get to
yes.
class. But thank you both so much for giving your time and your energy and putting together this beautiful slide presentation. We don't even actually have time for questions, except as the host, as one of the co-hosts, I get to, maybe ask a small question, and that is, on this task force, did you ever discuss defunding the police?
That is a very good question. And the answer to that is no. It came up, but I think the majority of the individuals on that task force, and I think it's even how the majority of, I think, civilians feel, that they don't want to get rid of the police, right? I mean, we recognize the good in terms of what they do, right? But we want them to do their jobs better, right? So and I mean, we're all oftentimes in different states, right? So in terms of where monies go, right, that is oftentimes, if you work in the legislature, your hands are tied as it relates to that. So they have a certain amount of monies that are allotted to them. So in terms of defunding them, that was not something that came up, but we want them to be more effectual in terms of how they do their jobs, in terms of policies, right? In terms of if a police officer has a pattern of engaging in excessive force, he cannot leave this particular agency and go to another agency. Within, before, it was like in 5 years, right? Anything that he did would not show up. We extended that to 10 years, right? So there is a pattern that is being shown, right? Another thing that was recommended in terms of their psychological fitness to do the job, right? It is a very stressful job. We're quite aware of this, right? But the stress on that police officers engage in on the job is just one form of their life stress. So they might be dealing with their own stress related to their own health. They could be dealing with the stress related to a spouse or their children, aged parents. All of those things could actually have a weathering effect on their ability to really make the best decisions, right, when they actually should. So
wonderful. Well, thank you. And one of our co-hosts, Connie Cornejo, has actually posted in the chat the video to which you're referring, Dr. Cheney. So if people are interested, they can hit on that now before we have to leave. But we hope that you all are not experiencing too bad weather in Florida and Louisiana, and that you can come back and visit us again. We hope that we will be doing this until the problem is solved. I have to say that I was a police officer for a couple of decades in California, in fact, East LA, that Dr. Robertson mentioned, is actually the Sheriff's Department and LAPD. So there's some overlap.
Oh, so you've heard of that program or whatever?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
However, I have to say, that's in the housing project that Father Greg Boyle is involved in. He's Homeboy Industries. I don't know if you all have heard of that, but he's probably done a whole lot more than police officers to reduce crime among gang members in East LA. But that's also the station that has officer gangs. So I think we have to be really skeptical of
some
of these programs.
I think about officer
gang. But yeah, and I have to say I'm actually more skeptical than ever now that we can resolve this excruciating problem in our communities. So, but you all, I think, have gone far in terms of enlightening us on these issues. And thanks again. We appreciate your kindness and your generosity in giving your time, and you'll hear from us soon. By the way, the video of this, I'll send you a link. It'll be ready probably in a couple of weeks, and you can have it for your files.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thank you again for the invitation.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you.
You are so welcome.
You know what? And
Before you go, I'd like to say the biggest thing about your program is documentation. There's so much documentation and so many books. I think the big thing is this allows people to be able to read and know what you guys are putting on paper. I think that's the most powerful thing there is about the whole thing.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you one question, Dr. Is it Tahera? Is that how you pronounce it? Texera. Okay, Texera. You know, when I received the initial email from you over the Christmas break, at first I said, okay, is this some kind of spam or something? And then I kept reading, and I was just wondering, how did you become aware of the book, or who, one of your students or something told you about it?
You know, so I think it was a criminal justice catalog that had
Roman and
the
Littlefield.
book in
Okay.
it. Yeah, it was a criminal justice catalog, and I was just absolutely fascinated with the description, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is, and I of course talked it over with our organizers, and we thought it would be a great idea, and we were not wrong. You all have certainly risen to the occasion.
I apologize for talking so much too.
Oh, no, please don't. You were wonderful.
There was no time for questions and stuff.
No, you all were wonderful.
Dr. Robertson and I, we said, we could do this in 3 hours, like 3 hours, even 3 hours.
Well, there's so much to it. It's a wonderful book, and we hope that we will increase your sales somehow.
Yeah.
And of course, we know academics don't make money on books anyway, but it's just, you know.
Yeah, tell me about it.
I think you're seeing that already, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll talk soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for being here.